Welcome back to Yun Consulting. This is a special video today. I know that many of you are watching this channel from Asia, from India, Southeast Asia, Japan, and you often hear about consulting from people based out of Europe and the US. And I know you want to hear about how consulting works in Asia. And for this reason today I've invited a special guest to the show, Milan Mecklenburg, who is actually an ex-colleague of McKinsey as well. We met each other in the McKinsey Germany office in Berlin. And he has done something very cool. He did an office transfer from McKinsey Berlin to Vietnam. And so he knows both worlds in Europe and Asia, and I thought this could be really exciting for you to hear about. Welcome, Milan. And the first question I have to you, how did you get the idea to go to Vietnam from cozy Germany?
Yeah, so I just wanted the experience. I wanted to get that high energy culture, that excitement, that emerging market feel, where often you work on sort of more strategic topics than in Germany, where everything is sort of very saturated. And yeah, just this exotic experience, see what it's like, learn from it, grow from it.
And how did you get the idea? I know after your MBA you changed something. What was it about?
That's right. So I did my MBA at INSEAD in Singapore. So the German office sponsored me to do that. And
awesome.
Then coming out of that, I did the transfer to Vietnam.
Okay, and how did you do the screening? Why Vietnam? Why not Japan or China? Bigger offices? How Vietnam?
Yeah, so I kind of made some calls mostly. And what I concluded is that, so for South Korea and China, the lifestyle is very aggressive and the language requirements also very harsh.
That lifestyle means typically these countries have a reputation of very long working hours.
Japan, I also thought that's the case actually, but actually the lifestyle is better than I thought there. We can talk about it later.
Really? Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And the language requirements probably also more lax than China and Korea from what I can tell. But my impression back then was that Japan is also not really in the picture.
Okay, so Southeast Asia a bit more relaxed and also easier for like non-local speakers.
That's right, because they kind of need to pool across the countries anyway. Language-wise, it's kind of a mess anyway. So they are quite open to sort of people who don't speak any of the local languages.
So I must say I had briefly considered, haven't really done it, to kind of change from German office to London office, and I know the process is really complicated. So how did you manage, which steps did you need to undertake to move from Berlin to Vietnam?
Yeah, so first I made a lot of calls to partners.
Okay.
To kind of get a feel for the demand, where the demand is and where it's easiest to transfer to. And also I made calls to my peers to kind of get a feel for what the culture is in every office. And what I learned is that Vietnam has had quite a lot of demand at the time, as well as a very nice culture from what I could hear. So that's where I went. I actually didn't know so much about the country back then. And yeah, I just kind of went for it.
You said strong demand, but you told me it's a very small office, but why would they prefer you to a local? Because normally, I mean, what is your asset that you bring that they hire you as a German, not somebody from Vietnam?
So Vietnam and Southeast Asia in general is growing very fast. So they're lacking high tenure people. So basically, if they just work with their pipeline coming in, recruiting university graduates, then they get an imbalance. They're kind of too low tenure heavy. They need to get some more experience.
That's an important point. How many years of experience did you accumulate before you started your MBA in Germany? Was it 2 or 3 years?
2 years, yeah.
2 years, and then your MBA. Okay, so that's why he came back as sort of a senior consultant, so he had some more value to share. And so I hear you out, so you actually had to do many efforts to interview people and be very active. So just guys, even if you manage to enter McKinsey, the journey doesn't stop there, right? You still have to hustle your way. But then in the end, the process wasn't so difficult, right?
Yes, getting started was somewhat difficult to figure out who you actually need to talk to. So there wasn't a lot of clarity on that. So I tried the INSEAD recruiters. I tried some HR stuff in Germany. I tried professional development managers in Asia, who are sort of HR staff who help with your professional development, as you might say. And then what turned out to be the right person to talk to was a recruiter in Vietnam. But that actually took me a while to figure out.
So there's no rule probably. Can you just briefly mention about your MBA bond? Because you mentioned that was in
That's right. So my transfer is different to usual transfer, and they call it a rebound for the McKinsey because I was sponsored to do my MBA by the German office. And then essentially there's kind of an MBA bond on the balance sheet. Like if I had to quit, then I would have to pay my MBA fees back to McKinsey.
So just that you know, that's what McKinsey doing, also other consulting firms to be fair. If you join with a master's degree and then later want to do an MBA or a PhD, but especially MBA, McKinsey sponsors part of the fee or full fee.
Almost all of the fees, actually.
Almost all of the fees, okay. But you have to return to kind of not pay yourself. Okay. Let's talk about what you experienced in Asia. Which countries did you manage to explore from your base in Vietnam?
Right, so I was based in Vietnam, and then I did some work in Singapore and Malaysia, but not too much, but also 10 months in Japan. So I got to know that office quite well as well.
So, okay, quite a few countries then. And if you, can you share a bit about how was your office culture in these different countries?
So first I have to say, Southeast Asia has a sort of pan-Southeast Asia office culture because there's a lot of travel between these offices. And I would say that culture it's very international, obviously. Outgoing, people are fun, like to dress up but not stiff. Very welcoming in general, very, very tolerant, given you have all these cultures. And
if you compare, like just say, or was it because you also mentioned Singapore, Japan?
Yeah, so within Southeast Asia, obviously each office also has a little bit of its local culture.
Okay.
And then Singapore might be a little bit stiff, I would say, and much more rule focused than the
more German.
Yeah, I guess in many ways. Yeah.
Okay.
Much more rule focused than the rest of Southeast Asia. Vietnam is very. People are very kind, very open, quite gentle.
Okay. And I know in a German office we serve all sorts of industries and business functions. Does the Vietnam office or Southeast Asian office, do they have a certain sector focus or also they serve everything?
Across Southeast Asia, you're going to find everything. Within Vietnam, I would say you also found most things. There's banking around as always. Sometimes the government.
Mian is a banking guy, just for you to know.
Not just a banking guy, but I did do a fair amount. There's also consumer goods. Real estate is big in Vietnam, like in many emerging markets. Yeah.
Let's go a bit deeper into these countries. So you served a couple of clients in these countries, but I think it was 2 years in total, you said, right?
Yeah.
Any interesting stories or funny stories about cultural differences you experienced in, say, Japan versus Malaysia versus Vietnam? Anything that happened to you can come out of the top of your mind?
So in terms of culture, I think I mentioned a lot about Southeast Asia already. Japan is quite different. Japan is much stiffer, more rule focused, but also surprisingly international. So it's actually more international than the German office, which is surprising. Given as a country, Germany has a stronger English level than Japan. But for some reason, Germany chooses not to be international and Japan chooses to be international.
I mean, to be fair, what he wants to say, there's many Germans working in the German office, but you still get to work everywhere abroad. But I know what you mean in terms of...
That is true, yeah. But you're not gonna have a lot of foreigners in the office.
That's true. That's right. That's true. Because German clients want you to speak German. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anything about clients you can say about in these different countries? I mean, you said mentioned Japan.
I think the clients in Japan weren't always that easy if you're a foreigner. And like often if you have a difficult conversation with the Japanese clients, because it's such a high context culture, as in the communication is not so obvious, there's a lot of subtext. You really want a Japanese person to help you in many client situations.
Okay, interesting. I want to dig deeper, see what happened, but I maybe do it like later. Now I'm really interested, and I think also others are interested, because you saw both the European style and the Asian style, and you could compare yourself. What were like differences you experienced between the German office and the Asian offices? Also, like in terms of style, process. I think you mentioned the travel culture.
Yeah. Maybe we start with the travel culture. So it's quite interesting. I think it varies a lot across offices around the world. In a place like London, Most will be stuff locally, obviously. In both Southeast Asia and Germany, there's a lot of travel. But what is unique about Germany is that you're not allowed to charge the hotel over the weekend if you travel somewhere within Europe.
That's true.
So it's quite peculiar and means you can't really get to know the country as deeply.
Let me quickly rephrase that. So I mean, basically, Germany is has a decentralized economy. So you really have to. It's not like London or Paris or like Shanghai. Where it's like very condensed. In Germany, you have to go around a lot, and also in Europe. And you say it's similar in Asia, right? Because you have to go through.
In Southeast Asia, it is.
And normally in Germany, it's the case that if you want to stay for a weekend where you are, you can't charge hotel accommodation for tax reasons there. And you say in Southeast Asia, you could basically do that, and you took advantage of that.
That's right. So you can charge the hotel over the weekend, so you can experience the country. You can also do things like fly to a different city if it's cheaper. Then you don't also get to charge the hotel, but you have a lot of flexibility in Southeast Asia.
And in Germany, you didn't do that?
In Germany, you couldn't. I think it was much more limited what you could do there in Germany, I think.
Okay. So I just tell you, and that's something also I recommend doing in another video, actually, maybe I'll link it here. Also in Germany or in the European offices, you can stay a weekend where you are. I loved doing that because I don't like flying too much because you just spend time on a plane. You can just stay a weekend where you are near your project location, but then you can charge the night from Friday to Saturday and the night from Sunday to Monday. That's possible. But Saturday, Sunday, it's not possible. And also, even if you're in a European office, if you work in the US or if you work in Asia, you can do the same as Milan did. So you can just stay there, and because flying back to Europe is far too expensive, and then you can just explore every weekend different location. That's some of the fun parts of consulting. Cool. Yeah, something that surprised me was about your salary level.
Yeah, so it's actually surprisingly similar. It's in between all of these countries as far as I can tell. So at least from like an associate level onwards. I made a little bit less gross in Southeast Asia, but the kind of taxes are lower, and you need to pay health insurance. The country covers that. And
did you get the same? Like, do the locals get the same as you? Because
absolutely, yeah.
And also the entry level?
Yeah, entry level would be lower. I think it might be lower than Germany for the entry level.
That's what I think, because what I've learned so far is that entry level is lower, but the growth is faster. That was my belief so far. But anyway, that's actually interesting.
But I think an important point is here that the promotions in Southeast Asia are slower than in Germany, and also slower than in Japan, from what I can tell. So basically, you end up making the same money with the same title, but less money with the same tenure because you get promoted less. And if you and of course, if you care about the promotions, and would actually put a question mark how much it actually means externally, what kind of title you're left with.
Interesting.
But
maybe
if you care about vice
president. I hear it so often.
So you actually, this is something I didn't realize before, but through the vector, you actually kind of end up getting paid less.
What about your horrible project at the beginning?
Yes, my horrible project at the beginning. So maybe the first thing to point out there is that within McKinsey, if we go choose a project, we call the people who work with the people we want to work for.
We call it due diligence, on people.
That's right. Very popular to do in Germany especially, but I did that wherever I worked. So you call a bunch of people and you get some feedback. And in Germany, their feedback tends to be quite authentic. So if they didn't like the project, they will tell you very directly.
Don't work with that person because, exactly.
In Southeast Asia, sort of, that person is okay means don't work with that person. Do work with that person means they express as something like, oh, this is the best person I've ever worked for. And I did not understand this. So I ended up on quite a horrible project, which actually had quite a reputation, the client. And it was not a very good experience, very hierarchical.
Okay. So you became a victim of Asian politeness, I guess, here.
I guess maybe it is. Maybe you could phrase it that, okay. Not being quite as direct and harsh as Germans can be, maybe.
If you kind of think of learnings or recommendations, for others who would like to maybe do a transfer first.
For the transfer, I would just recommend making calls, to be honest. You make calls to partners to get a feel for their feasibility.
Partners in those offices you want to transfer.
That's right. And definitely also juniors, so like your peers. You definitely want to talk to those as well. And
You mean like your internal German person responsible for your career development, right?
No, that too. So you definitely want to talk to your sort of handlers kind of in your home office, because they kind of need to let you go and cooperate with the process.
As you mentioned, the partners Nummer eins, did you mention? The PS?
And peers as in like your people at your level, say you're an associate.
Okay,
you
so,
want to talk to some associates there. Or even,
to see how this goes. Yeah, exactly. So not just the formal way, but also the informal way, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
And you can, maybe you know some people there, but you can also just bring up random people from the internet and someone will talk to you.
And how about, because I was told that you need to have like a top 5% rating in McKinsey to be able to do office transfer, like the hurdles are really high and so on.
I think it depends on where you want to go, but I would say the majority of the offices you can, once you're an associate or an engagement manager, which tend to be more in demand in growth phases, which we had like the last decade almost, I would say, or maybe like the last 5 years at least.
Yeah.
Then an average rating is enough to transfer to most offices. Okay. A place like Singapore or London might require above average.
You see, that's so much about rules, but then you have to find out how you can break them. And also in McKinsey, we say build your own McKinsey. Well, right? So just you have to do it. Okay, to wrap it up with some concluding remarks and questions. So I think you mentioned 2 years in Germany, 2 years in Asia, right? If somebody wants, like say, somebody from Europe or the US maybe likes to work in Asia for some time, would you recommend that person to join as a new hire in the local office, or would you rather do it like you would first get up in your home office in Germany or the US and then later transfer?
I think if you want to work in the country, might as well give it a go. You can put in preferences in the recruitment mask, right? So you can put in like your 4 office preferences. And I think usually if they don't want you, they will pass you on to the other offices. Like you don't lose your shot, that's my understanding.
But you also said it may be easier if you have more experience, like, because when you're more valuable. Because my question always is like, why wouldn't I take a local who's equally qualified?
Yeah,
like
and it'll definitely be harder to get going in. But if you're in the position that you don't have experience, then you might as well try doing it directly if that's what you want to do. But if that doesn't work, then later on it's also an option.
Okay, cool. And then I know you also took the decision to leave McKinsey. And my question is a bit like, if you had stayed on, where would you have preferred to continue working? In the European office or on the Asian office?
Very interesting question. I think I would have preferred to stay in Asia. Either office is too rough for my taste, to be honest, too much work. But
okay.
But like the workload, and I think we didn't touch on this actually, the workload. So in Germany, as you know, we tend to have very long Mondays to Wednesdays, often very long nights, and then kind of like a normal work day on Thursday.
Yeah, just say the long hours typically can be like midnight, 1 o'clock, sometimes later, sometimes a bit earlier. Yeah,
I would say midnight, 1 o'clock. It's like an average in Germany.
Yeah. I mean, on Thursday you would go home, you go on a plane. If there's no COVID, you would go on a plane at 4 or 5 p.m. and go home.
Yeah. So basically, you're like going straight into sleep deprivation almost in the first couple of days, especially if it's worse than average project. And then you have a shorter Thursday and Friday, and usually the weekend is free in Germany. In Asia, it's kind of more even. You don't have these really long Mondays and Wednesdays as often, but you tend to stay at the client side on Friday, and then also don't have the short Thursday, because people are traveling less as well, right? Like, remember in Germany, everyone is flying home because they have to. And then weekend work is more common as well. In my experience in Southeast Asia, the weekend work was not paid, but in Japan it was.
Okay.
Maybe again, like coming back to this kind of emerging market does actually sort of affect how you get paid in a way.
I made a similar experience in my US work, so that actually also clients are used to send emails on weekends, which we in Europe typically don't do, but also that days are a bit shorter. But then also I had like European teams to serve, so I would have to get up very early, so because we have calls set up in Europe, and I guess when you were in Asia, you probably were in the Asian time zone.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I think we are getting to the end of this talk today. Last but not least, I want to tell you guys, also if you join the US office or the European office, there's plenty of opportunity to work abroad. I myself worked in Asia, worked in the US. European offices are very strong. But you see this, Min-Paf, you want to add something?
Yeah, I actually want to add one thing. And one thing I would really recommend is as soon as you kind of rock up in your target office, you really want to get to know some local people on your level really fast and build a little bit of trust. If I had asked my Vietnamese colleagues after I had a few drinks with them about that project I ended up on, then I would have known not to go on that project.
Make local bonds quickly with
Once you build a little bit of trust, I think especially in a sort of emerging market. Whereas if I just call some people, they might not be as open.
Because we Germans are very straightforward, right? So we take every word for granted.
Yeah, and I think that's calibration. They could have told me as well. They're like, oh, if they say the project is okay, I probably shouldn't do the project. I think they probably could have told me that.
Cool. Thanks, Milan, for making the time. And also, if you have more questions, drop them in the comments. I think Milan and I are happy to serve you here. If you want to get in touch with Milan, check out his blog. I will link it in the video description. That was it for today on UN Consulting. See you soon back on here, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Jack.